Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, listeners. I'm the sorceresscagliastro, blood sorceress, necromancer in the hands of 9. And on the air tonight, I am with 3 of my favorite people. My co-host, Rogue Ostrowski. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Sorceress. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Morganstknight, our producer and science officer. How are you tonight, Morgan?
I'm great. Thank you, Sorceress. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing producing the show. And we are honored to have Victor Furhman with us tonight, Victor the Voice Furhman, who's got about 45 minutes of time, and we're going to absolutely get as much out of that as we can this evening. How are you, Victor?
Wonderful, Sorceress. Thank you. Good to be with you tonight.
Thank you. Tonight's subject is one of the ones I find quite interesting. We are referring to this show as packing away religious baggage. In the decades and decades of time that I've done this work, I can say that one of the really huge hurdles people come to me with is religious baggage. They want to make everything right in their life. They want to take control of their life. They want all sorts of focusing ability. They want to make decisions. And then they reflect on that which was taught to them. And this is problematic. I wrote a book called 31 Nights of Spiritual Virginity, exercising the religious baggage that one is stuck with. And that book will be back up and available before the end of the year. This is a promise. I took it down because I didn't think it was rich enough in options. So I'm editing it and putting it back up. But the point is that this is not about bashing one religion over another. This is about being taught how to live by adults who are teaching you when you are in the presence of your child's mind, taking things in at face value, finding things that don't necessarily match the life that you want to have, taking on information that's too big for a person who is young and new and trying to find their way in this world. And what the outcome is, which is really just a situation where one is carrying all of this dogma, this religious baggage, if you will, the rules, the regulations, the ideals, all of the sort of thing that tell a person how to behave and how to run their life. And these kinds of things are not a hand-in-glove fit for everyone. So one often spends a great deal of time getting back to pretty much to zero, getting back to the place where one can say, well, you know, maybe I've lived this my whole life, but it's not for me. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family. Roman Catholic Sicilians, and I'll get letters, I'm sure, are different. They know it's all blood sorcery. We know what it really is. We know that the idea of religion is about learning how to use our own blood. But that's unusual, and that is not how most people are raised. Most people are raised in a religion that may or may not fit them. The problem comes when it doesn't. The issue we're addressing tonight is those people and that experience where one was raised with a dogma, a set of rules, a set of regulations, a set of statements of what one should be, what they're allowed to be, what one is expected to think of others, and how that affects someone going forward. And I like to do a little bit of a roundtable on this, but Victor, I know you don't have a lot of time with us tonight, but I want to talk to you about this because you are often in the presence of people who are going through some changes, transitions, all sorts of other things, and I say there are atheists in Foxhole. What's your experience in that area? What do you think about that statement?
Well, let me bring some perspective in my background, a little perspective to this. As I've shared before on this program and elsewhere, my parents, my father was I'm going to say an agnostic, not really spiritual in any way, had no real belief system. His parents, my grandparents, were Orthodox Jews. My connection with Judaism came through my grandfather, but he was very much a spiritualist, and in his orthodoxy actually was a little bit of a rebel and was more into the mystical aspects of Judaism than the traditional aspects of Judaism, and that's, I think, where I got a lot of my background from. My mother actually was raised Roman Catholic and converted when she married my father. So I came from one of those families. There are a lot of families like that in the 50s and the 60s, interfaith or interfaith couples who brought two different perspectives, and some share the perspectives and some split the perspectives. My own life changed going through a number of different practices and systems, including Hinduism and Buddhism and various forms of not so much divinities, but spiritual practices. And then about 30 years ago, I had something happen that completely changed my perspective on all of this, and I think this probably would set the tone for the rest of my life up to this point anyway. And I don't say that tomorrow I will change in some perspective, because I'm the kind of person who recognizes that nothing is ever locked in stone, carved in stone or locked in steel. And I met a very wise woman. She was in her late 80s at the time. This was 30 years ago, so I was in my early 30s. And she used to have these gatherings at her home on Friday nights in which various types of spiritual topics were discussed, a lot of mystical topics. And one day she looked at me and she said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "I'm being called to tell you this, to share this with you." And these were her exact words. She said, "God," and you can say the divine if you don't want to use the word God, does not mandate that we be holy, but God would love for us to be whole. And when she said that, my mind exploded, because I realized what she was saying. She was saying that we're here to be everything we're meant to be, to embrace whatever we choose, to reject whatever we choose, to grow, to learn, to move in that direction that creates wholeness for us, whatever that means for us, is to be whole. And it just was such a refreshing and wonderful thing to hear from this woman that it really set the tone for the rest of my life up to this point. And one of the things that happened is I was called to an interfaith seminary in the mid-'90s and was ordained an interfaith minister in 1997, which enabled me to do the work that I do now, including working in hospice and working with people in transition, working with people in trouble in various aspects. So getting back to your original question, what I find is that a lot of people, especially in hospice and transition situations, are very adamant about holding on to their basic faith tenets. And for example, I've worked with people who came from Catholic and mixed Catholic and other religion background, Catholic and Christian, Catholic and Jewish. And when it came to the time of hospice, when it came to the time of transition, the Catholic side demanded on having a priest. The other side demanded on having a minister. And everybody was sticking to their guns in terms of their fundamental religions. And I think that, in a way, inhibits the transition and the passage in a way of peace, in a way of true love, which if you go to the foundation, and this is what the wonderful thing that I learned in my seminary experience and what I really knew in my heart to begin with. And then if you strip away all of the man-made, and I say man-made because women would never have done this, tenets of religion, it's all control. And if you get down to the root foundation, it's all about the heart. It's all about love and taking care of each other. I think fundamentally, for me, that's what it means. And so consequently, you have these people putting in their things, and what's the word I'm looking for? To be absolved of sin, to be free to go to heaven or wherever they think they're going to go, or they've been told where they're going to go. And this fighting, this constant bickering really takes away from the meaningful essence of transition and allowing this person's spirit to go free and for the disincarnate level to take place in a way that's peaceful, reserved, and love. And so that's the experience that I've had up to this point. You also see this a lot in interfaith marriages where the couples really don't care. They love each other. And it's the parents and the grandparents who impose their belief systems on the couple and consequently cause all of the issues leading up to the ceremony. And I encounter that all the time also.
that's how religious baggage gets in often. Sometimes it's not the person themselves, it's the people around them who are badgering them with it. And you see that a lot. Thank you for that story. Doesn't want us to be holy, just wants us to be whole. I like that part of it.
I love that, yeah.
I remember when my daughter was talking with some friends. She's much younger. She's in her mid-teens now, and they were kids who were in parochial school. And they were talking about which holidays meant what and all that stuff. And some kid was talking about the story of Easter and what the Bible says, the Christian Bible says all that is. And I knew where this was going. I'm watching, and the kid's talking to her and telling her the whole story. And she says, all right, so how does that translate into marshmallow-filled eggs? And I said, well, okay, I've done it. I've created a kid without baggage. I really felt like there was a very freeing moment here, but there's a stronger point to be seen there. I was watching a young child, this kid must have been about 7 or 8, pontificating, telling us all about this very powerful belief they had in this set of stories. And I thought, this kid probably cannot write in cursive yet, or probably, doesn't know their own zip code. But they know the great stories of the Bible and are developing a relationship with those stories as they are fact and having something to do with how they have to live their life. And that was you're talking about life-changing moments. For other reasons, that was a life-changing moment for me, and I knew it was important to write about it and talk about it because this kid sort of had a puppet kind of feel to him. He was going on and on and on, and this story and that story, and this means God wants us to do that. And I mean, this is truly a kid who was nowhere near 10 years old. And this child's mind, adult mind thing started to develop, and I started talking about and writing about what it means to have these stories that we're intended to find a strain of either fact in, I don't really like that word, or a strain of something that we can grasp at that matters in our lives. And that being the difference between being whole and being holy. One can take something from a story they hear and always get something good out of it if they want to find it. But it's the forcing. It's the demand that's made that one believe the entire context of something. And I do want to go on and talk about this word believe, but let me jump over and ask Chris, who I'm sure has quite a bit to say about this idea of religious baggage. I can feel it bubbling over there, Chris. I can feel like where you are. I feel like, come on, let me get in there. So what do you think about this idea of religious baggage?
The first thing I tell people that won't let go of any kind of religious belief is I tell them, don't let religion get in the way of your faith. Because all religion is mind control. That's all the hell it is. I mean, people sat down, gave a whole bunch of rules. It's no different than the Constitution or any kind of the Magna Carta, whatever the hell you want to think of, that sets the rules for people. That's all the hell it is. And my biggest complaint of the way the religions are run nowadays, and this frost my ass for years now, is, like Victor said, this has to be man-made because my background is really diverse. And some of it has to do with gypsy and a couple other things. And the thing that just I can't shake it, no matter how hard I try, is how they can tell me that a woman can't go near certain things because when she has her time of the month, that she's unclean. Yeah. And that's the biggest crock of shit I ever heard in my life, because if you look at the old pagan faiths, that is the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, because they wouldn't have that. You nail somebody to a fucking stick, but yet you want to sit there and tell me that, my mother's unclean because she has her period. What are you, nuts?
Well,
that is the most ridiculous, egotistical, chauvinistic thing that you could ever say.
from there's a vast history of that among my people, the Sicilian people. And it's, it isn't an issue of unclean. It's an issue of having more power, more energy. So it's quite the opposite. And I think what you're talking about comes out of fear. People knowing that.
Thing.
Go ahead.
What you were talking about with more power. Well, that's the way I was taught on the other side of it. If you go back to like the old Germanic and, Teutonic and Greek and Roman and all that other stuff, you go back to that, and that is a time when a woman is more powerful. I mean, and people are going to argue with me, and I will get hate mail, and I don't really give a shit about when you make a set of runes, about using, if you're a woman and you're doing it, you should anoint them with blood, and they tell you to use that kind of blood because it makes them more powerful.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's just, I don't understand how that came about, where they just looked at it and said, oh, well, yeah, you're dirty. It's like, there's nothing more dirty than, I mean, come on, people, you used to wipe your ass with your hand, and you want to sit there and say something about a woman is unclean? Come on, that's nasty.
Well, I will say that from my perspective, it comes, like I said, it comes from fear. And all of that comes from being afraid of women when they are at their highest emotional power, their greatest power in general. So I think that developed from that. And I agree with you, it is kind of odd. The idea that a woman uses her menstrual blood in sorcery is a scary one to most people. So therefore, this sort of thing has to be oppressed. I think it comes from that.
Think about how, I mean, you were different because you were raised in a different kind of family. But now think about the normal, average female. When they hit that time of their life, and they're, number one, their head's been full of shit since day one about, that God is this and God is that. And then on top of all the emotional shit that happens when you turn a teenager, now you got this dumped on you too, that you're nasty and you're unclean and you're not fit and all this. What the hell? How can you beat a woman any more than that way when they're that young? I mean, you want to talk about abuse. I mean, you don't get much more emotional abuse than that. But yet it's all right that people do that. That's okay. That's allowed. Tell me all day long that God's watching me play with myself, and that's, and then you want to tell me about God hates women because, they have their period, and that's to remind them of something. Come on, don't give me that. That's horrible. How can you do that to kids?
Well, you know what, Chris, that is actually
people all asked up.
That is actually one of the broadest strokes of dogma, is exactly what you're talking about. This kind of thing where it drags in and it becomes part of the day-to-day life of people. It becomes part of the not to overuse the word, but the cycle of their being. When the natural functions of our lives, which include all kinds of things, which include communication, sex, anger, all kinds of things, are the normal cycles of our life. When these things get caught up in dogma, it's very complex. It's a very difficult way to live. Morgan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. Basically, in my background, I led a rather charmed life, and that has absolutely nothing to do with Cree women and lowrider jeans going around making potions. It was actually just the way I grew up. I was given in second grade, before I even made my first communion. I was raised Catholic too, but we were not adamantly, heavily religious Catholics. We just went to church once a week, and that was about it. And I was given a book on Greek mythology, which totally opened up my eyes to the idea, wow, there were people who thought there were more than one god at one time, and they were pretty neat gods too, and goddesses as well. That was the real mind blowing, because I'd been taught that God was a man. God is the father, the old man in the sky. So seeing goddesses going around doing whatever they wanted to do was, pretty neat. And then about the tender age of 12, I was walking in a Walden Books. This was way back when they had the Walden Books, and I think that was right about the time that Triceratops were wandering the earth, it seems like. But I found in the astrology occult section, I found this cute little book called The Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. And I thought, that was pretty interesting. Let me pick this up. And I was only, I think, 12 at the time. I may have been 11. And that was a real mind-opener. I didn't really get into the ritual aspect of it at that point, because I thought, well, he's just saying that these rituals are just to get your emotions out anyway, so he doesn't really believe they're magical or anything. But it was everything preceding all the rituals that he went into, knocking down religion, showing how the organized religion took natural urges and turned them into sins so that people would feel guilty about it, so that organized religion could control you and tell you what you were doing was wrong, that only this organized religion had the way to make things right between you and God. And also things like why, if they were so interested in helping the poor, were all the churches decked out in gold and all the priests wearing these fancy clothes, when all that could have been sold to help the poor, but they never bothered to do that. So by the time I was 13, I was pretty down on organized religion. And I have to say, I don't think I got a lot of religious baggage. People probably think that I am a religious person because I work with voodoo so carefully, but I don't do it in a religious sense. To me, the entities I work with within voodoo are actual entities. They exist, and we work together. I don't serve them. I don't worship them. I don't pray to them in the sense that most people associate of praying to deities. They're just people who are not visible as far as I'm concerned, although they can take visible manifestations, and we work together. That's how I approach it, is we're working together as coworkers. We're not, it's not a servant-master relationship as far as I'm concerned. And I think because I was able to avoid a lot of that guilt and a lot of the feeling that I must eternally serve some invisible old man in the sky when I was growing up, that allowed me to transition pretty easily into it and keep a pretty open mind, but also keep all of that feeling of guilt and the feelings of obligation that are so often tied to religious beliefs away from my life for almost all of it.
It's interesting, Martin, because when I think about your work and the more I get to know you, what I think of is you in partnership with these large entities that have come to being via the human desire for simplification of focus, if you will. That's what I always think of. I almost think as your altar as sort of going to the workplace and sitting with those who are interested parties and come to the table with various skills. And since I first met you, that's what I thought about the way that you approach things. There seems to be an equal partnership, a non-servant kind of thing. Like you said, there's no master here.
Right.
In my world, that's done with energy. In my world, that's done with polarities. It's done with magnets. It's done with the understanding of our own blood. So we are very similar in our way of approaching things when it comes to the clarity by which we see the collective consciousness around the energy that we work with. When I work with magnets, if you say the word magnets, people know what that means. Something's drawn to something else. So even these objects that are without the sort of beauty or the extra layer of creation of personality, they still have a collective consciousness. And they are still, in my mind, therefore, without baggage because they make sense. They are provable. They're at least provable to me. We talked about the word believe. A couple of people mentioned the word believe. I'm very careful with that word, just for my own self. I always say I don't believe in anything because I either see the way someone treats me or I see the way two things work when you put them next to each other, or I see the way sigils work, and therefore it isn't an issue of believing. It is an issue of observation. And the reason I'm talking about this is someone recently said to me, actually a very nice person who asked if he could have a discussion with me about how I got to where I am in the work and how I started to develop these kinds of things. Very pragmatic. It was a very interesting conversation. And he said to me, I have a question to ask you that I'm afraid to ask you. And I said, now I must know what it is. And he said, are you lonely without a belief? And I thought, no, actually quite the opposite. I feel very safe knowing that that which I go to in both in crisis and in moments where I just want to make stuff better for myself in my life is something that for me is tangible. So I have a very strong foundation in the understanding of what it means to know. And I think that that's something that we can talk about here tonight, and what we know and what we don't know and what we are not willing to just accept. You know, I said earlier there are atheists in foxholes. I've worked with a lot of people, decades of this work. And many years ago, I started really thinking about how many people I meet who don't have belief, but they do have dogma. They're told that, you know, I met a man who is living a life of sorcery and all kinds of things and still not eating meat on Friday. And I said, what's that about? And he said, well, I don't know. I feel like if I do it, something will happen to me, something bad. Because he grew up with that particular piece of dogma that one doesn't eat meat on Friday. And I said to him, well, let's explore the dogma. And he said, well, I'd rather not because I'm afraid that, you know, it'll come back on me. So these...
I got a question real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
No eating meat on Friday. I mean, I understand they did it because Jesus was a fisherman and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
I guess
he was a carpenter, too. Does that mean we have no wooden furniture on Wednesdays? Or what the hell is that supposed to mean?
I think that's Tuesdays, Chris. I think that's Tuesdays.
Ah, okay. All right. I missed that part of
I'm sitting on a wooden chair right now, so if it's Monday, it's
shit, you know. Now you got to say 20 Hail Marys and, you know, a couple of novenas.
Oh, confession. You brought up confession.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. All right, so being brought up Catholic, and I'm sure everybody has some experience of this, and if I'm being a little verbose, well, then that's just where I am tonight. Confession. I just could, you know, I think I was just wired differently than the other kids, and maybe because of what was going on in my home and the true source of my work, which is understanding the power of our own blood, and that was not necessarily going on at the, let's just say, less ethnically diverse individuals living down the block where people were sort of very fundamentalist and basic about the way that they were doing things, without this peppering of the feather of understanding one's power of one's blood in their own home. And I remember being under 10 years old and standing online and being told we had to get into the confessional, and I'm thinking, well, what am I going to say when I get in there, you know? So I always thought, well, I'd make something up, and I used to say the most ridiculous things. I would say, you know, and I would come up with whatever could I guess, buck a commandment. But I remember one time in particular, I got in there and I said, well, I lied. And the priest said to me, well, when did you lie? And I said, when was it over? And he was kind of silent for a minute, and I said, did you leave? Are you still there? And he said, no, I just don't really understand what you're saying to me. I said, well, the only thing I can do is come in here and lie because I don't really think there's anything wrong with anything I'm doing. So why don't we just get this okayed up front? And, you know, this was always my position on the thing. But the idea that the way that we get to a God is by sitting in the dark, talking through some sort of, I don't know, shady window to another person, telling them what we perceive to be a sin so that they can make a call and we can sit outside and mumble prayers while that's going on. I'm sure that is not an efficient system. Okay, I'm done.
You know, I can share a couple of things. Number one, I have a humorous story about baggage. When I was in my mid-30s, I started going to a Buddhist monastery in upstate New York. And when I first arrived the first time, they have the Dharma Hall where people sit and meditate, and there's a large statue of the Buddha at the end of the Dharma Hall. And the tradition is you bow to the Buddha, and in bowing to the Buddha, you're not worshiping the Buddha, but what you're saying is, I recognize that within me is the path of enlightenment. And there were two of us who came from a Jewish background, and this woman and I. And so everybody was going up and taking the turn and bowing to the Buddha, and then the two of us get up, and we start to bow, and our knees lock up on both of us. And in my mind and in her mind, we're hearing, thou shalt not worship graven images, because the Ten Commandments were drilled into us as children. And, this whole concept, and then finally we got it, and we bowed, and that was, recognizing the nature of enlightenment and recognizing that within us lies the path to enlightenment, that each sentient being has that capability. So I thought that was just a quick share on that about getting rid of baggage. The other thing is there's an old joke, and I know I know probably a gross of rabbi and priest jokes, but the joke about the priest and the rabbi who get together and they have coffee every couple of weeks, and one morning the priest says to the rabbi, you've never had a bacon sandwich, have you? And the rabbi shakes his head, no. And then he says to the priest, and you've never had a woman, had you? And the priest shakes his head no, and the rabbi says, beats the hell out of a bacon sandwich. It's this whole concept of what we bring with us into that situation is so interesting.
I have one terrible religious joke, and I don't usually tell jokes on the radio, but now I have to. And I know everybody has things to say, but just bear with me, because this is the only religious joke I have, and I think it's funny. So God says to his assistant, I'm going to go on vacation, and I'm going to go to Venus. And the assistant says, no, you can't go to Venus. The last time you went there, you got terrible sunburn. You were wrecked. Everybody had to do your work. You're not going. So God's getting pissed off, and he says, all right. I hear you. Instead, I'm going to go to Mars. I'll do a little skiing. I'll get some outdoor sports. And his assistant said, nope, absolutely not. Last time you went there, you broke your leg, you whined, it was a mess, everybody had to carry you around, you're not going. So God's trying to get around his assistant's nonsense, and he says, all right, you know what I'll do? I'll compromise. I'll go to Earth, I'll get a little sun, I'll get a little winter, I'll get all the stuff. And the assistant says to him, Earth, really? And God says, yeah, what's the problem? He said, really? Earth, you went there 2,000 years ago, you got that really cute Jewish girl pregnant, everyone's still talking about her. That's it. That's it. That's all I have.
Well, you were talking about confession before. And, the whole concept of sin, it's very interesting. I had a wonderful teacher in this interfaith seminar. He was a rabbi. And he says, does anyone know what sin really is? And he said, in Hebrew, the word sin is the word chet. And what that means is when an arrow at a target and misses the mark. So it's not about doing something terrible. It's just missing the mark. It's missing what your objective in life really is. And I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful way of explaining that.
Yeah, that's not how it's viewed in Catholicism.
Yeah.
Well, there's been that movement, and I know people who have been in it, that they refer to themselves as Jew-boos. And this Judaism and Buddhism and its connections and this kind of thing, which seems to float away from dogma and about choosing a certain sort of lifestyle or way of being in this world, which I think is interesting. I don't know if you have any experience with that. Chris, did you have something you wanted to tell us about confession? You mentioned it to me.
Well, the funny thing is my dad has gone back to being Catholic after 40 years of being everything but. So he went to confession, telling me this. First thing I said is, why the hell did you go back? And I said, why did you go to confession? He said, well, I have to go and confess my sins. And I looked at him, I said, Dad, you're 70 years old. What the hell do you think you did in 40 years?
Yeah.
I said, I know you. I said, you haven't done a goddamn thing wrong. I said, you're as vanilla as ice cream. I said, how the hell? You didn't do anything. I said, maybe you wore the wrong socks with your outfit one time. I said, other than that, you didn't do a damn thing wrong. I said, how are you going to confess that?
What did he say?
He said, well, I have to go. He said, I can't take communion unless I go to confession. I said, who said?
Yeah.
I said, who said? I said, don't worry. I said, they won't strike you dead at the altar. Trust me.
This comment that you made, I can't take communion unless I go to confession. I mean, this is really, to me, this is sort of like Dogma squared, because it's not even how these tenets of a religion and dogma plays out in our day-to-day life and the things that we're trying to accomplish, but it's almost as if the religion itself holds itself over your head and says, well, you can't even participate in it if you don't get the inside structure correct. And
well, that's why he didn't go for 40 years, because my parents got divorced. And you know as well as I do, you can't go to church if you're divorced. Yeah. Well, that was the big carrying on. It's like, well, why can't you? You know, well, they said I can't. Well, who the hell are they?
I mean, I know people who have had marriages annulled by the Catholic Church and have more than 2 children. So, that is a terrible place to be for those children. They get this sense that they were invalidated in some way. And that is a really terrible place. 2 of them are, I have 2 clients who they don't know each other, but they've been in that situation where they were essentially invalidated by the action of annulment. I mean, we joke about it, but it's a very broad stroke. People are very, very deeply injured by this thing, and people's sexuality is just so horrifically damaged by the ideology that one cannot be who one is, or that one chooses who one is, and all this sort of thing. And when you get to the third level of this thing, which is, well, if I don't believe in all that and I'm rejecting that, even though it's still affecting me, how do I get out of it? And what happens if I want to go practice something else? This sense of being a traitor. I think a lot of people come to that place.
Eat meat on Friday. That's the first thing you do. I mean, I'm not bullshitting you. The first thing that you do absolutely. Is you break every damn rule they told you can't do. I agree with you in terms of that being a methodology out. But what happens then when you're standing there and there's no one to help you pick up the pieces and understand that that was okay to do? I mean, people come to me when they've had that collapse, when they've done all the things. I get a number of individuals who come to me because their sexuality does not fit the dogma that they were told that they had to live in. And they're trying to deal with that. And it's so sad that an individual is not living a happy life or living a fulfilled life because of, some sentence that was read to them over and over again when they were children. It is definitely a methodology to break all the rules. But what happens is, in the real core, I think, of what we're talking about here tonight, is the damage that happens when one has the guilt hangover, the emotional hangover, the religious hangover. And I've told the story a couple of times about this girl who I did a lot of work for, a lot of sorcery stuff, healing, dealing with family custody, all kinds of stuff, kids safe. And then 2 years later, one of her children came down with an illness, and she said, came back to me and said, you think it's because God's angry that I came to you? And I was like, well, if your God will give your child that kind of illness, I suggest you go God shopping for another God. I read a thing recently that said there are 5,000, it's from the Atheist League, there are approximately 5,000 gods being worshipped on the earth at any one given time, and of course yours is absolutely right. So these kinds of things are powerful, they're damaging. And, Morgan, tell us, does your you don't come from a voodoo practicing family?
No.
Tell us how that works out.
Well, we have a détente about it. I try to get around it with some of them by saying, well, I'm a Louisiana Catholic, because that's a code for a voodoo practitioner. And but them all being from Cleveland, they have no idea what that means. It's like, okay, so you eat jambalaya. What does that do? I don't really force my religious beliefs on them. And when I go home to visit, I go to my room and I quietly do what I need to do. They understand why I don't go to church with them on Sundays, and they're fine with it. They understand that I've got my own path and my own life, and that I don't need to actually have to follow the religion they have for us to still have a good familial relationship. It started when I was a teenager because I refused to get confirmed. And I did everything I could to get out of getting confirmed because at that point, I guess you're 12 or 13 when you get confirmed, or at least you were back then. And I said, look, I know that I don't want to confirm in this religion because I can't guarantee that I'm only going to believe in this religion, and that would be dishonest of me. At that time, I had a lot of questions. So I did everything to get out of those pre-confirmation classes. I mean, I would actually go to the drugstore, buy syrup of Ipecac on the nights of those classes, and I would swallow it before I went to the classes so that I would throw up when I got there. My parents had to come pick me up. And I did that a couple times, and I said, look, there's something wrong. I just don't want to go back. And they let it slide. So I was never confirmed. And I think that was pretty good of them because that was back in the late 70s, early 80s, and there was still in Cleveland, there was a very conservative area, particularly our suburbs. So that was pretty liberal of them to say, okay, well, you don't have to get confirmed if you don't want to.
You want to take the seriousness of that, Chris? Or Morgan, rather, you had, not Morgan, I'm just so blown away by what you just said. Victor, do you want to take the seriousness of that? I heard the whoa.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think about the word religion itself and the root meaning of the word religion and what it means. It means to bind again or to retie or to rebind. And I think it's time that a lot of people start untying and unbinding and finding the truth within themselves. And I think that's where we have. And on that note, I have to say goodnight to everybody.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that late. Okay, Victor. Have a great night.
It's a privilege of being with you folks, and we'll talk to you next week.
And do send her our regards.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Sure, of course.
Bye-bye.
Of course.
Good night, Victor.
Morgan, that is a powerful choice that you made to make yourself ill, and I want to just be with that for a moment, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
This is you're a kid. You're probably not even really a teenager. This is a powerful choice for a child that age to make based on, you weren't going somewhere to be, flogged. So therefore, the content was powerful enough to equal some sort of very distasteful thing for you. That was not, even though it wasn't a physical thing. So to make this kind of choice, you really had to be in some kind of pain.
Yeah, I was. I think what I was in was in adamant understanding that this is not where I wanted to be. I took it to an extreme, I guess. But what I thought was, well, there's time for me, but I'm not going to commit to this. At that point, I understood I would be dishonest by going up there. Yeah. And I talked to a friend at school about it, and they said, well, just go along with it. They'll give you a party, you'll get money, you'll get gifts. And I thought, no. I don't really know what I believe at this point, so I am not going to make that kind of commitment. And I'm very glad that I did that. But,
go
on.
The lightweight side of it is just as scary. And by scary, I mean, just distasteful, let me just say instead. That this idea that, well, just go ahead with it, you'll get a party. I know a lot of people who've gone through their bat mitzvahs that way or their bar mitzvahs that way as well, not just one religion, many religions. And the sense that, well, just go through it and you'll be fine. And the washing away of the validity of what it is that goes on in those circumstances is sad and profound. And I think that one looks back later in their life and says, why did I do that? Or why did my whole family, all these people who have offered me this sort of ruling sum on Dogma, think it was okay for me to just say, oh, all right, I'll go through with it. And this always goes back to my issue of the child's mind. What are we teaching children at these young ages? We're beating them down with dogma and religious ideology and how it all works. A friend of mine had 3 kids, and the youngest was a boy who was 5. And he was sitting with myself and a few other friends a couple of years ago, and this beautiful little 5-year-old boy, 2 of the people we were sitting with were a married couple, 2 men, friends of mine, and this little boy said, oh, so you're going to hell? He was 5. And I said to my friends, I'm sorry, I didn't know this was going to happen. And they said, no, it's it's not your fault, it's not your kid. And the kid's mother turned around and said to him, I told you not to say that out loud. Not I told you not to say that or not. Any of those kinds of things. Obviously, this kid had gotten it from his family, but at 5 years old, he had this idea in his head that he knew the answer to this thing. I mean, a 5-year-old doesn't even know what any of that means. What are we doing to our children? What are we saying to them? Are we saying that this religion is so weak that we can't wait till you're 15 or 16 and talk to you about it and see if you want to come along and play? I mean, I think that's one of the big problems, is what's shoved down our children's throat, the child's mind. When I finally get that book out again, I'll be talking quite a bit about the child's mind and the adult's mind. I think it's disgusting. Even in my own practice of work, yes, my daughter's been around it her whole life. She is not required in any way, shape, or form to participate. And I think that's a valuable thing when it comes to children, to show them what you do, but don't expect them to want to do it. I mean, I commend you for knowing that at that young age.
Yeah, and I try to get that out. Now, I have a child who's very important in my life, and titularly, I am his godfather. But in reality, his parents do not have firm religious beliefs. So what I did with him was I exposed him to a great number of religions when he was growing up. When he was 4, I was taking him to the Hindu temple here in Atlanta. And many people don't know that we have a huge Hindu temple here in Atlanta, which I believe may be the largest Hindu temple outside of India. I would take him to Buddhist temples. I would take him to see the Tibetan monks chant. I would tell him stories from different religions, Buddhism and other religions, including my own religions, Voodoo and Santeria. So I exposed him as much as I could, and now he is a pretty cool little atheist. I have to say, he didn't swallow any of it, which is what we were hoping that he would, that he would eventually make up his own mind. And he may still choose at some point, but at least he's been exposed and he knows what else is out there and that there's a whole range. And I think that when I talk to him about it, he says, well, yeah, that's why I don't think I could believe in any one particular thing, because so many people have so many different opinions and none of it seems to mesh. Yeah.
It's like that thing I saw today where it says there are 5,000 gods being worshipped at any time, and of course yours is right. How do you make a choice like that? I mean, I just think that anything that's that profound should have some essence of calling to it. I've always said about voodoo, you don't call voodoo, it calls you. And I feel that way about all of these methodologies, these pathways, but somehow, more particularly that one, because of the collective consciousness of it is so high frequency and so involved in sort of an artistry, a look, if you will, and I don't mean to minimize it in any way, but a sense of it is a certain way. And what happens if you don't have any of that? What happens if nothing calls you? What happens if science calls you? Science called me. I could not make sense out of anything else. I certainly had the opportunity to. Catholic school, 12 years of that. Religious friends. I am very close friends with a group of Lubavitchers, Orthodox Jews. I'm not really sure why they like me so much. I say it all the time, but they do. And we talk about science, and we talk about a lot of things, much more progressive than you would think. And they feel that they're very lucky to have been born into what they've been born into, and yet some of them feel like that I am as well, very lucky to not have been. So I think it's a more open exchange than one is used to. However, their children are raised in absolute dogma, absolute, hands down. There's two sinks, and there's a way to pray, and there's, what happens at this hour of the night on Friday, this kind of thing. And I'm not knocking any one religion. I'm knocking the idea of having this kind of something so profound as a belief, if such a thing exists, forced upon you. What do you think about that, Chris?
Well, I was raised like you, Catholic, but fortunately, I grew up around my great-grandmother and a couple other older Pennsylvania Dutch women in the area, and I was kind of pulled aside. I grew up in my Uncle Louis' house with my dad and my grandmother and my aunt. My Uncle Louis was Catholic, so that meant everybody was Catholic. It was his house, his rules. That's how it went.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying anything bad. It's just, you know how the old country was, and it was the same way in Poland as what it was anyplace else.
Sure.
And I at least had people that would pull me to the side and say, hey, look at this. I wasn't taught so much about gods as what I was taught about things of the earth, like plants and herbs. And if you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you use this kind of oil on this kind of cut, it's going to heal it. Honey is an antibiotic, so is coconut oil. All this kind of stuff that I was taught, and I was taught the power as far as that goes. I wasn't all hung up. Like I said, I went to church and I went through the motions, because if I didn't, I would have become part of the wall, whether I threw up in class or not. That just didn't happen. They would have hung a frame around my ass, and I'd still be sitting on, still be part of that wall. Well, I always said my dad had two kids. One he put through college, the other one he put through a wall. You can figure that out from there.
I'm guessing you were the wall?
Yeah. And, so I was taught, those kind of things, which I looked at, not so much, I didn't look up to find a God. I kind of looked around. I found, the real power was around me and what I could do, not so much what other things could do. It wasn't so much what, things that were made up. I mean, I could hold a plant in my hand and tell you what it was going to do. Like when I do the work with people that pass over, it's like I know they pass over. I know it. I can feel it. I can see it. They talk to me. It's like it's valid. This is the same person. This isn't somebody talking to me from 10,000 years ago or whatever. And no, nothing like that. No, everything that I deal with has to do with what's on this planet. So
right, that's the. I'm sorry, just wanted to say that's called not believing. That's called knowing.
Right. I mean, I'm an atheist, kind of. I don't discount everything, but I'm really skeptical about a lot of it.
When you say you don't discount everything and you're skeptical about a lot of it, I find that very interesting. What does that mean?
I know how, just like, I don't know if you've seen divining done with the divining rod, dowsing, same thing. I don't know how it works. I know it works. I mean, it has to do with the magnetic pull of the earth and how it affects the copper rods and all that kind of thing. But I don't see it. I know it's there. I don't see it. Mm-hmm. I have proof that it's there. It does something. It's not like somebody's telling, well, God's here and God, God. No, I haven't seen anything. Like the joke is, for 2,000 years, God did all these wonderful things until video cameras were made. Now there's nothing.
I see. So you're saying that there's been a transition to fact of some kind or proof of some kind?
Well, you've said about magnets.
Uh-huh.
You can see how they work. Magnets work. You can see them. You can feel them. Where if you're looking at gods and genies and things like that, you got to pretty much take somebody's word for that.
Well, yeah, I talk about the prayer people a lot and the concept of the floating genies. And the prayer people get together and they have a collective consciousness that says God is there for them and it's all going really well. And if they pray on it, it'll get better. my understanding from that is if you take the collective energy of a group of people and you focus it on one thing, all thoughts, ideas, and intentions having physical weight, something happens. It's a sort of submissive kind of sorcery.
But that's quantum physics. You can prove that.
Right, of course. But at the emotional level, it's submissive sorcery, by which I mean they're saying they're attributing it to a third party. They're saying God came and saved me from, drowning, as opposed to a whole bunch of people standing on the shore and saying, come on, you can do it, get in here. So there's that idea that the collective consciousness attaches itself to some floating genie, and God says it's okay. My question is always, what kind of a God needs that amount of input? And I say that, and I don't say it lightly, because when people say to me they'll pray for me, it used to really piss me off. Now it doesn't really bother me much anymore, but now I just understand what it is. But I went through years of this. There was a period of about 5 or 6 years, and it has to be more than 15 years ago because it was before my daughter was born, maybe even more than that, with people saying, you know what, I know that your heart is empty. I know that you're not feeling God's love. I know that, and I was around a lot of people of many, many different kinds of backgrounds, and I'd hear this all the time, I'm going to pray for you that you find God and all this business. And my question is always the same one, and this really goes to emotional baggage to me. If your God is so tuned up to the needs of humanity, why does your God need you to make the phone call? Why does your God need you to say, oh, could you look over here at this person and see if you can help them out? I think that that's a very strange human dynamic, and it says quite a bit about the condition of the religious mind. It says quite a bit about the condition of being a person who's lingering, if you will, in this strange miasma between one's own power and this idea of faith as being somebody else who's making this happen. And this is one of the things I was interested in hearing when Morgan was talking before as well about this is partnerships, working with these entities. It's partnerships. But, Chris, you've seen a lot of people who have these religious hangovers who are in this position, haven't you?
It gets really sickening, if you think about it, because I have a real problem with people that are so eager to turn over their control to things. The biggest thing that drives me nuts is when I'm driving in my car and I see somebody that has a bumper sticker or something that says, Jesus is my co-pilot. It's like, well, you better let him drive because you can't drive for shit. How lazy can you be that you do not want to take control of your life and you're turning it over to something that you don't even know is there? I would feel better if I turned it over to my dog Leroy.
Because you see him.
People, right, and these people, you talk to them about this, and I get the same thing. It's like, well, you must be lonely. No, I'm not lonely. I feel pretty goddamn good.
Yeah.
Because I know everything that I do is my fault. Whether it's good or bad, it's my fault.
Well, that's called taking responsibility. And that's
right.
what, in the world of sorcery, that's what we must do. We must stand up and take responsibility for each and every action, whether it's a sigil or the movement of one's hand, and just have this ongoing truth with ourselves that there is a sense that we are controlling our own power, our own destiny. It is, you're right, Chris. The word is brilliant. Your language about this is beautiful. Was that this sense of laziness? God will provide. God will take care. All this kind of thing going on, and not taking responsibility. I was curious as to whether or not Morgan had clients that come to him about their guilt hangovers or this kind of experience. Morgan, do you have some thoughts?
Oh yeah. Oh, I sure do. I get that all the time because they're coming to me. And sometimes they're sneaking in, and they're saying, "Well, I'm very uncomfortable coming to someone like you because God could punish me. I'm thinking, well, why on earth are you walking through my door? Yeah, exactly. Because you know what? If your God's going to be throwing lightning bolts around, don't stand next to me. Go stand over there. I don't want you anywhere near me. But what really gets me is that this happens a lot with people who get away from mainstream religion. They take control of their lives back from God, and then they hand it over to the goddess. They go into Wicca. And I'm not going to down Wicca, but I'm going to say that, honestly, you're doing the exact same thing. And what always gets me is when they insist on ending their ritual, whatever they're trying to get, with, if it be correct and for the good of all. Or and it harm none, let this happen. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if what you wanted was really correct and for the good of all, don't you think the deity you're praying to would have already made it happen? Why are you trying to manipulate things? Why are you being a hypocrite and trying to manipulate things through sorcery and magic? And if your deity needs you to point out that, hey, this over here needs fixing, well, then your deity isn't all-powerful, or if they need that much input from us down here as to how to run the universe, then why on earth are you worshiping that deity? So I can't get over the contradiction that they have. It almost seems to me that it's a little less hypocritical to be in one of the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, because a lot of people there say, well, it's just God's will. That's just the way it's going to be. And they hand their life over in that way. They don't kind of sneak in through the back door and say, oh, well, life is great, but let me just see if I can work a little bit of magic to make it even better. But only if the goddess says it's okay. Well, like I said, if she already thought it was okay, she would have made it happen. So what are we going on here? But I have to deprogram them from that, because then when Wicca doesn't work out for them, I've had people who have gone through dozens, maybe not dozens, but a lot of religions. They have gone through Wicca. They have gone through Satanism. They have gone through the Golden Dawn. They have gone through the stuff with Aleister Crowley. They have gone through the Dragon Rouge. They have gone through all these groups, and they come to me and they say, I still can't shake this feeling that I should be doing something different and that something bad is going to happen to me if I don't find some prescribed way of living. And I don't know really what to do with that, because honestly, if you've gone to all these other people and nothing, and you have to have a set of rules, basically what you're looking for is permission. You want someone to tell you what to do. And I'm not going to be that person who tells you what to do. I will be a person who tells you what I can do for you, but in the end, you're going to have to make decisions, and you're going to have to lead your life the way you need to lead it. And that leaves a lot of people discomforted, because they expect me to just give them a rule book to play by. And one of the great things about voodoo is there is no rule book. There really isn't. There absolutely isn't. I mean, some general things like don't go around hacking up innocent people like the Tonton Macoute did in Haiti. Okay, that's probably a good rule to live by, just in general for humanity and safety. But there is no firm rule book. We don't have this, thou shalt not do this or thou shalt not do that. That's part of it. All we're trying to do is just get through life. And in the end, if we can have a little bit of assistance from other entities, great.
Well, the words control, permission, apology, these words are huge. And I have a lot of clients, and, I don't care who hears this, it's not relevant to me, who come to me after a lifetime of some kind of, or some long service to the goddess and to Wicca and to being New Agey kind of witches, which is very different than an old world kind of thing, which is almost undefined, but is more of the kind of earth sorcery, and which Chris knows more about than most people forget. This kind of thing. I'm talking about, I live in Massachusetts, so it's in Massachusetts, and I'll get hate mail from those who I know who are there, but there is a big glitter town full of witches here. And people go there, and then they call me, and they say, okay, now I would like to get some real serious help. And it doesn't mean that everybody who lives in Salem is without talent. That absolutely does not mean that. What I'm saying is the culture of the glitter witch is a problem because it is all, fairy wings and glitter and the goddess, and it's all beauty. And I have met the most bitter, angry people in that circle of folks than I have met in a lot of other places, because this perceived white light is a deadly thing. The universe is 70% dark matter. You can perceive all the white light that you like, but when your ritual then has to end with, as Morgan was saying, if this is right for everyone, if this is appropriate, the threefold rule. If you must be in a state of self-reminding at all times that whatever you throw out there comes back to you, which I don't agree on. But if that's your premise and you have to make it part of your ritual to remind yourself, then there's an integrity issue. There's a dogma issue. That whole New Age thing is the best way to deal with that is to take your gun out and shoot yourself in the foot, because there really is no surviving the New Age thing. It's the best way to be as nice to yourself while your life is coming apart as you can possibly be.
Yep.
People come to me when it fails, and it's an excuse, and I'm not making comments about Old Norse ways. I'm not making comments about what it really meant to be a witch when this whole word came to be and the structure of that thing. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the deadly religion of the New Age concept. A lot of people come to me to shake that thing. It is just as much of a religion as any other religion. There are rules, there are regulations, there are ways to talk to the deities that are prescribed, and it's really an empty vessel. I feel very strongly about that.
It's church outside.
Yeah, outside church.
and sometimes naked. They still do that. It's like, well, that kind of was like, that's where I drew the line. I was like, really, I understand the whole thing about sexual freedom and everything, but when I went, and I did go to some of these rituals when I was in college, when I went to the first one, I was like, y'all are not the people who should be doing this. Seriously, because we're stomping out there, I'm naked at night, and no one knows where they're going, and they've got a flashlight. I brought a flashlight, so we had two flashlights. No one else thought to bring a flashlight except one other person. We're tromping through, and about halfway through one of the ceremonies, we realized we're all standing in poison ivy, naked. So this was, and so where was the goddess then? My goddess at that point was Caladriel. So I'm
gonna say at that point the goddess was inside, well covered.
Probably.
This, and I know Chris wants to jump in, but I just have to say one more thing. This sense of, because I've painted it pink, it's okay, or because I've made it look happy and perky, it's okay. It's the most deadly, because it's the ones, these kinds of structureless structures, if you will, they don't pan out. And people who get very involved in this thing come to me all the time because they say, I've been working at these spells forever, and this candle and that candle, and it's not working out. And there's a little store here near where I live in Massachusetts, and I walk in there, and there's 3 women in there who are anxious to give a reading, and they're all miserable. They're miserable people. And they say all the time, oh, we have no money, and we don't have this, and we don't have love in our lives. And I'm like, but you're the local witches. You're the card readers. You're the people sitting here telling other people how to get it done. How's that working for you? And, all of us have a life that we want more in, but I certainly don't have a life that I have that little in by any means. So, where's the trade-off? They left the big 3 to go over there and sit alone in this kind of empty concept of the goddess. I'm sorry, I've not seen it work. I am not a believer. I'm a person who sees something work and know it works, and I haven't seen it work. Chris, you had something you want to say?
From my standpoint, as far as the earth and things go, I've seen so many times about that damn, if it, do as thou wilt, if it hurts none, whatever the hell. Let me explain something to people. I don't care what you do on the face of this earth. whether you're walking across your living room, or you're starting your car, or you're killing a cow, or you're cutting down your lawn, you are hurting something. Everything has a reaction to any action you apply to it. If you start an ambulance to go save somebody that's having a heart attack, you are killing off parts of the ozone layer. You are letting out fumes from the fuel, and you are changing the atmosphere around that vehicle. You are essentially harming something. When you take the oil out of that vehicle, you're going to be harming something. You harm it to put the fuel into it. It's like the whole idea of not harming anything is nothing but bullshit. It's a way to make you feel good and to give you some kind of guidelines, because 90% of the people out there cannot function without a set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to have religion to set your moral compass, then you've got a bigger problem. You don't need a church or a tree stump or anything else out there. You need to sit down and go to a therapist, because you've got some problems.
What about this idea of killing in God's name?
Well, that's ridiculous. What the hell kind of God would want you to do that? People carry on about the devil. Well, I've read the Satanic Bible, I can't tell you how many times. There's nothing in there whatsoever that says anything about killing anybody. Christ, I don't even want you to kill animals. LaVey was one of the biggest, he was one of the big proponents of animal rights.
Mm-hmm.
So why is your God so damn hell-bent on killing people? Hell, you go through the Bible, and Christ, they killed more damn people in the first couple chapters than most of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies.
Yeah, it is a violent book. I suggest people educate themselves. It is a violent book. The Quran is a violent book. Sorry, it is. These religious books are violent books. They talk about war. They talk about forcing your belief on other people. They talk about your making your religion the religion of everyone. And these are violent books. That's the way it is. To proceed and pretend that they're not is inappropriate.
One of my favorite quotes is from a movie called Quills. It was about the Marquis de Sade. Well, then you've seen it.
Yeah. Now you're in my yard. Go ahead.
Well, the line was, "Why should I believe in your God? He hung his own son up like a side of veal. I shudder to think what he would do to me."
Yeah.
It's like, wrap your head around that sometime, people. Just is the next time, somebody wants you to go to church, wrap that quote around your brain and think really hard about that.
Well, de Sade, it's interesting that you brought de Sade up, because de Sade's purpose in life, what he was doing, was making people look at themselves, making people look at what the status quo was, and saying, how do you feel now that you've said that out loud, and how do you feel now that other people have seen the exposure of your beliefs? He used sex to do that. He used sex to get everyone's attention, but it wasn't really about listing 120 days of Sodom as one of his famous books is. It was listing what the human mind does, how it annihilates itself, how it anesthetizes itself, how it gives itself over to power, and how it loses its own power in the craziness of rules. And proceeded to show us that by going to the furthest left extreme, where there were even more rules created by his characters and the craziness that went on. But you're absolutely right. If that's what the God you believe in did to his own son, allegedly, the rest of us would be in poor shape. I feel like Morgan wants to jump in here.
Yeah, the whole thing is predicated on the idea that we're intrinsically flawed. And somehow they've managed to sell this to billions of people over thousands of years, that we are intrinsically flawed, that we somehow need fixing, and that we can't do it ourselves. This goes into the early stages of Christianity were full of a bunch of different belief systems. There was no one organized Christianity. There were a bunch of things which were later termed heresies, such as the Arian heresy and the Donatists, and they just kept going on, and they had a lot of different views about what God was really wanted and what Jesus had actually said when he was walking on the earth. But what eventually triumphed was this philosophy promulgated by St. Augustine of Hippo, St. Gregory the Great, and others, that humans are essentially flawed. There is no saving them. Only God's grace can allow them to be saved somehow. Mm-hmm. And that's just a total line of shit. I mean, why would God create something that's intrinsically flawed? And then you get into the predestination, and that's actually getting a really scary revival among some evangelists who believe in absolute predetermination, which means that when you are born, or even when you're still in the womb, God has already decided whether you're going to go to heaven or hell, and nothing you can do in the meantime, nothing you can do during this lifetime will mitigate that. You're already destined to go to heaven and hell. And it's just so sickeningly warped to me to think that any supreme deity would create an entity knowing that that entity was only going to end up suffering the eternal punishment that these people claim that is going to happen after they die. I just can't wrap my head around the psychology of a person who would worship a deity like that. It's twisted in the most insane way.
In that world, how do other human beings know? Do they know by meeting someone how they're destined? I mean, how do they sort that out?
Oh, I don't know. God sorts it out. He's got, in addition to running the universe and everything else and fixing us all after the end times and that, he also has to go through every human who's ever lived and say this one over here, this one over there. I actually begin to feel sorry for the Christian God in a little sense, because he's got an awful mess to deal with. Yeah.
And making sure everything's plugged in and whatnot. There's another Desaad quote that I like very much, and, you know, I am beyond a huge Desaad fan. I have made every possible effort to communicate with him, and I know that I have communicated with him through auto writing, which is not something I do that often, but seems to be the way that he wants to communicate. He said, "My manner of thinking, so you say, cannot be approved. Do you suppose I care? A poor fool indeed is he who adopts a manner of thinking for others." And very much of what he did was about saying to people, "Are you sure you believe that? Or did somebody tell you to believe that?" He didn't say that quite in the Brooklyn Italian Girl way that I do. But he says, let's sit down for a second and see if that belief even belongs to you. He encouraged us to question at all times what it is that we are doing. And to your point, Morgan, the reason that I go back and I revisit that particular quote is he knew that there was a prevalent belief amongst the religious, which at that time was just about everyone, that we were beyond flawed, that we were dirty, that we were, that we were the cattle, we were that which their God, put up with, these horrifically flawed beasts that came onto the earth and had to spend their life in atonement so that they might at the end be 1% less disgusting. And if you think about that, what a vile way to live. Yeah. What a horrific and disgusting way to live.
And the thing is, no one ever got a chance to stand up, or they had chances, but they never thought to stand up and say, well, wait a minute, didn't he make us this way? So he made a mistake, so he's not perfect then. Is he really God?
You see, but this is what I think. I think that although people did not say that, they did think it. And that's why that's the discontent. The nature of the discontent is not what one says, but what one is not allowed to say, or what one is afraid to say. And I think that is the nature of discontent in religion. I mean, I know that people who come to me and come to both of you and say, I've had it with the story I was told of how I'm supposed to live, are not people who are saying that to their families. They're finally saying it out loud to someone, to me, to either of you, to some other practitioner that they go to where they feel at least they're in a non-judgmental space. But the nature of discontent is not that they're practicing their religion and it's not so great. That's not the nature of discontent. The nature of discontent is that they know in their head it's not working for them. They know they're bigger than this, or that this is nonsense or some crazy construct. I mean, what I said in the beginning of the show, when my daughter was little and she said this thing, well, what does that have to do with chocolate eggs? You know, an hour and a half ago that was funny, but let's think about it. An hour and 20 minutes, whatever. Let's think about it. Let's look at how ridiculous the life practices have become. We joked about not eating meat on Friday and this kind of thing. The life practices. I mean, I was at the house of some of my Lubavitch friends a couple of years ago, and I put the milk container down in the vegetable sink. You would have thought, it wasn't labeled, I didn't know. You would have thought that I had literally thrown away the baby with the bathwater. I mean, the crisis that went on. And it was on, of all times, Shabbos. I was invited over. So no one could clean it up. And I said, well, I'll clean it up. And they had to sort of get together and have a little posse, if you will, discussion of whether it was okay for me to clean it up. Somebody had to clean it up. And clean it up means taking the thing out of the sink, running the water, and putting it back in the refrigerator. But these rules, these insane regulations of, you know, I can't put the light switches on. I have to walk around in the street and look for a non-Orthodox Jew or someone who's not Jewish at all to come to my house to put the light switch on a Friday after it's after dark, and I forgot to put the switch on. How crazy is that? I know quite a bit of. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's all about, I think it's people are more intrigued about making rules and seeing if they can get the other person to jump. And they've just tacked it on to the religion.
I know somebody who actually made a living being the guy who stood around in those neighborhoods, in Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods. And I'm not bashing one religion over the other. I'm talking about what I have observed. And kept a tally. People come out and say, oh, I forgot to turn my stove on. Could you turn my stove on? Could you turn my light on? I left the car lights on. Could you turn them on? And he'd have a tally, and after Sunday, they'd pay him for all the things he did. So there was a term for it, but I can't remember it exactly, so I'm not going to say it. Maybe he'll hear this show and text it to me. But there's a term for it about being the local non-religious or non-Jewish person who comes in and does these things on a Friday night or Saturday during the day. And I'm thinking,
entrepreneur?
Yes, exactly. That's the word. There's another word. There's another term, but yes, the entrepreneur's word. But and actually quite lucrative if you are the main guy in that group. I guess if there is such a hierarchy of people who turn the light switch on when you can't do it. But he said to me, he really realized how ridiculous this was because here they are. I mean, if it came down to it and the answer was, well, I didn't put my light on, so I have to live with the light off. I mean, that even had more integrity or validity than let me go find a guy that God doesn't care about and let him switch the light on, because that's what it came down to. It came down to, well, this must, let me find somebody who doesn't matter. And
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. There is something a little more serious along that line that goes on in Tibetan Buddhism. Most people think the Buddhists are strictly vegetarian, but that's not true. It depends on what country you're in. And if you're in Tibetan Buddhism, because there's so little arable land in Tibet to grow crops, they have to be very careful about what they use it for. So they do eat meat in Tibetan Buddhism. Even the Dalai Lama eats meat occasionally. Mm-hmm. But what many Buddhists do is they don't want the bad karma of killing the animal, so they will take it to a Muslim to kill for them. Mm-hmm. They don't want that bad karma that's going to come back, and then they will be reborn as an animal. But it's perfectly okay to go to your next door neighbor and have him do it for you, and then he can get the bad karma. So these things are just it's the whole thing of finding a surrogate, a surrogate to do something that bothers me.
It's worse than he gets the bad karma, because anyone who knows me knows that I have no acceptance of the concept of karma. So I'm using it in the term that you're discussing it in. He can't even get the bad karma because he's not created as one of us by our God, so he's not even going to be in a situation where he's worthy of that judgment.
Yeah.
So, and that's why people fight in religion. That's why religious war is so prevalent. And I heard a quote, and I'm not sure if the numbers are true, but I heard a quote that said in 2,000 years there's only been 40 months documented on the planet where there's been no war. I don't know if that's true or not. It was written by an archaeology student, and I don't know if he was trying to take poetic license on the thing, but I thought about that conceptually and how I feel pretty much all war comes down to a religious component. Even if you look at slavery, and that had its own religious component, and whether or not one does that sort of thing lives in that kind of world. And so this is what looks like a political issue is often religious baggage. That's what's important to talk about. And look what's going on globally now. People are killing each other in the name of their God. I go back to that for a moment, because that to me is the craziest language one could possibly have. I'm killing you because my God wants you to either believe in him or you have to be removed. This is a crazy thing. What is the term, the opiate of the masses? I don't even know that it is the opiate. It's the poison. It doesn't have just a hallucinatory effect. It has a poisonous effect. It's a disgusting thing. When people say to me they want to study with me, I say, why? And they're surprised. And I say, tell me what it is that you want to get from this. And what they expect from me is to say, sure, come and take a class. And I don't do that. I don't do that until I've had an interview with them, I've talked to them, and have some kind of understanding of where they want to go. But they're always quite surprised that I'm not trying to bring them into the fold. I hear that language a lot, or get them to do this work because I want them to be part of the followers. I have no followers. The work might, but I don't. So I'm very careful about that kind of thing. What did you say, Chris?
I was going to say, what are we following? I missed that.
Yeah.
Just exactly what are we following? I thought that was the whole purpose of what we're doing, is we don't follow anybody.
Right, exactly, which is why I'm always surprised when somebody asks me that question. I would think you'd want more followers. I said, well, what I want is I want more people to utilize the material and get the life they want and forget they ever met me. The work should stand alone. Sorcery should stand alone. Ultimately, it will, because it will outlive me, and then it will stand alone, and that will be the point of the thing. That's the legacy, and have nothing to do with me. That will be, and then people will come along and they'll take it and they'll write better versions of it, and they'll get better at it than I was, and there'll be more, because it's not contained in a divinity structure. It has nothing to do with that, and that's what is about it that's so useful. I want to take a moment to talk to people who want to know how to break the dogma. And Chris, you had said an interesting thing. You said start breaking all the rules, and I agree with that. And I agree with that from a position of being a strong person who understands the value of that. The issue with that, and that issue only being not from a judgmental point of view, but experiential, the people who have tried that and who have had some struggle with it, people who have left the folds that they grew up in and not been able to set a new way to function in their life. So, and I'm not saying that's everyone, I'm saying that that's some people who experience it that way. One has to understand that this is all physics. And if you've lived a life where you have a great deal of God thrown at you and all the rules that are associated with that, whatever your religion is, it doesn't matter. Because the concept of all religion is that we all stand together, share common beliefs, act certain ways based on those beliefs, whether they're rational or not. And we stand in some percentage, whether it's 2% or 90%, in the blindness of the idea of belief, because God said so, and we don't know when he said that, so somebody wrote it down a bunch of years ago, and here we all are, and at the end of the day, that means that if your marriage sucks, you can't get out of it. So that's kind of what I'm saying here. Is my point of view is that dogma is deadly, and it needs to be released. So if you go about that releasing by breaking all the rules, there are people who feel very lost then, friendless or confused or without community. And when I say without community, it doesn't mean that you've necessarily moved away from your community, but you've moved away from your community at the emotional level, the intellectual level, the theoretical level. And so there's nothing to talk about around the table because your hands are not clasped in prayer when everybody else's hands are clasped. So there's a sense of being on the outside. So what do we do? And I will have a book to support this very soon. But I just want to take a moment to talk about some of the techniques. I offer my clients a thing called 31 days, where for 31 days they write down the dogma that they're experiencing on small pieces of paper and they burn them. And this is more an intellectual and emotional mind fuck that we need to do on ourselves to undo the mind fuck that has been done upon us. This is a very terrestrial, in our hands way of burning away that which has kept us prisoner. And it really is only the first step. But I say 31 days because when one does something for a period of 31 days, one sort of has a new approach to things. That is their new way of doing things. If you do it for 5 or 6 days, it's still new. If you do it for 100 days, it's boring. So after a lot of data, I came up with 31 days, and that seems to work. And I suggest that the very first experience is to know the dogma that you want to remove. I mean, that is really the thing. You could say, yeah, well, you know what, I don't want to be stuck with any of the tenets of Christianity because that's what I grew up with. I wanted to get rid of them all. But because freedom requires knowledge, sorcery requires knowledge, and the new path requires knowledge, no path requires knowledge. To break away from anything requires an understanding of what the bars are made of. What do you have to break through? What kind of torch do you need to get through? The particular kind of metal that's holding you in the cell. And this is why I'm saying it's very important to do this investigative work within the self. What still holds you? You will be surprised at what still holds you. You could be a person living very far away from the religion that you grew up with, and you will find that you're still standing within it. You'll find that you're still, an ambulance goes by, you still make the sign of the cross. You haven't been to church in 20 years. You don't talk about God, and you have this sort of biological reflex, this almost autonomic, past automatic, almost autonomic, these kinds of things that were jumped into you when you were very young. So what you need to do first is accumulate a large number of the things that are still holding you down and acknowledge that they exist. This is not a new agey approach. This is a practical approach. This is the science of sorcery. We're talking about data. We're talking about the scientific approach. You cannot go into the laboratory to solve the problem if you don't know what the problem is comprised of. And in this case, what you need to know is what's holding you back. So I say to clients the very first thing that they should consider doing, and just, stay in a relaxed space while you're listening to this and just take it in, because you can listen to it in archives, so don't waste your time with notes, take 31 slips of paper. You'd be surprised how fast they go. You think, 31 things? Well, I'm not going to have 31 things. When you get to 31 things, you wish you had 131 things. What we're doing is opening the portal to the void that has to be emptied, and that is the space that now holds the dogma that holds us back. And in physics, when there is a void, it will be filled. So the flip side of this is we have to talk about what to fill it with. So you have these 31 things, and every single night you burn one, you let it go. And does that mean that you won't feel that way anymore? Probably not. You might still feel that way. It doesn't matter. This is an exercise. This is the step one in the removal of that which holds us back. When you burn something and you let it go, there is a human experience called confusion. And in confusion, we come up with a new plan. If you think of confusion as the tiny void left when one burns something that says, don't eat meat on Friday, for example, you burn it and you look at it and think about this. Stand in this place for a minute. Whatever your religious thing is that holds you back, whatever one strange little thing that doesn't really seem connected to anything like that one of those sort of random, arbitrary, hard rules, hard and fast rules, and you burn that and you stand there and you say, well, what do I do now? Well, what do you do now? You have an opportunity to fill that time with something else, to fill that time with another expression of intellectual pursuit, of art, of music, of beauty. I say, during this 31 days of letting go of some of the things, or at least documenting, acknowledging, and making an affect of some kind of burning of these things, letting it go that way, giving yourself an intentional mind fuck where you say, I don't own this anymore because I burned it, and let it go. And keep a big pot of sand so you can throw these little slips in there and they can burn all the way down to a crisp. And then you're left with this void. I suggest you fill it with some art or some beauty or some debauchery, or something that you had been afraid to do because your God said you couldn't. And this is taking away the dogma that sticks to the child's mind and replacing it with the adult mind, and allowing the adult mind to explore the void. What we're trying to get to here is voids. We're trying to create voids, let go of the dogma by creating, and therefore allowing these voids to create themselves and be present. And then making self-appointed, personalized, individually constructed choices of what to put in them. I suggest beauty and all of this sort of delightful things that we put into these voids, because they increase our sense of pleasure and our sense of moving forward away from agreements that you were forced to make in a situation where you were working with a child's mind. And if you take any one of those things, if you burn one thing and you fill it with one adult thing that you've wanted to do, or something you've wanted to read that you felt was against the religion that you were raised in, even something that simple, even a meal that is against the tenets of the agreements that you've made, fill each and every void with the other thing, with the thing that negates that void, negates what was in that void even further. Imagine doing that for 31 days. Imagine the self-indulgent, self-pampering sense of allowing in beauty and change and Epicureanism and the touching of things that you have been told were taboo in some sense. Imagine this growth moment. Imagine this for 31 days, 31 nights, whenever it is that you want to do it, and exploring and allowing and abandoning the baggage. We called this show Packing Away Religious Baggage. I say take it further and let's abandon religious baggage. Let it not be yours anymore. Let it go, because it doesn't actually exist. It's an ideology set upon you when you had a child's mind. And at the end of these 31 days, take a breath, take a look. Say, where am I? What amazing things have I allowed myself to experience in this month or so, a little more than a month, that I would not have experienced should I still have allowed myself to be tethered to the dogma. Write down data. Talk about how it felt to explore, to put your toe in the water when the religion says it's not rainy season. And have that experience. Write the words you were afraid to write before. Write the things that when your journal was in your home when you were a kid, somebody might have read, and now they won't. This is about growing up for the first time away from the baggage. This is not an easy thing to do. It is a necessary thing to do to escape this sort of terminal end, if you will, to the baggage that we are forced to carry around. And now consider you've done these 31 days and you have this moment, this breath, this experience that you can say, well, for a minute, part of me belongs to me, a part of me that never belonged to me before, a part of me I've never met. And allow yourself to extend that void. Keep it open for a moment. Take a breath and have an idea of what you want to put into that void. There are many other rituals that we can do. There is a blood ritual which helps one release the guilt and the pain and all the stuff that comes with this baggage. This is one that I would discuss privately with people if they want to email me, and we can have a discussion about how to do that. And it's very effective, done along with the 31 days are in and of itself also very effective. Release, release, release. But remember that it's very important that when you are going through a release and a change, that not everybody else around you is going through that release and change. This is a private journey. It was a very public journey getting to this point in your life with all this dogma. For all these years, you have stood alongside those who told you that this is how it is. You have spent this period of time listening and being told what to do. You have followed like a robot in maybe one tiny area in your life, or maybe in a broader stroke, based on how much baggage you're carrying. But at the end of the day now, you are going to be a different person when this is over, and it is now your job, your assignment, if you will, self-assigned, not by me, to not pontificate, and it's an interesting choice of words, not to judge and not to demand that others take this journey away from the dogma as well, but to offer them an accessible key, a way out. There are many rituals, there are many sigils, there are many things that I've created and offered and threw into the pot, if you will, of how to keep those voids from getting filled with ritual, with dogma once again, how not to slip back, how to continue moving on, how to fill those voids with bits of your own path moving forward. And when there is a small book on that, I will announce that. But for now, take those 31 days. It will be the most self-indulgent thing you might have ever done in your adult life, and I suggest that you do it. It's simple and it's effective. And I think that this on-air moment of discussing sorcery and how to do it has reached where it needs to go, has been effective, and I feel like people have had a connection to what it is that I'm saying. And take that journey if you want to talk to me about it and you want to move further. It's pretty simple to find me, but we'll talk about that right before the end of the show, to which we are close. On-air associates, comments?
I think that was a perfect way to structure this sort of thing, because it makes people involved in the process. They actually have to think about what it is they're getting rid of. Every day they have to find something new to get rid of. And it may be easy in the first few days because there's probably a whole avalanche of things they're thinking about. But I believe that if people really follow this process as you've given it, when they hit maybe day 10, 11, or 12, they're going to see how really deeply these things have impacted their lives, because they're going to be coming up with new things and looking at things in a new way and realizing, wow, I never understood how totally effed up everything was that I was taught when I was a kid. And they're going to be able to dig deeper and really start doing some internal cleaning out.
Thank you for that, Morgan. Very well said. Yeah, you're right about that. The data has proven that the first week of this process is easy, and that then people make choices such as to repeat one or to find the ones that they don't even know that they're dealing with. And that's when it gets complex, and that's when the work really gets done. But that is what the data has shown. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that process?
I look at the whole thing like tried to quit smoking. And I know what it's like when you're trying to get rid of an addiction. Mm-hmm. And that's how I try to tell people that this is. I mean, it is a psychological addiction. And you've got to take it day by day, just like you said. And when you feel that guilt, and that guilt is going to be the killer.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel bad that you're doing something that you're not supposed to, sit down and ask yourself, why aren't you supposed to be doing this? What is the purpose? What are you hurting by doing this? You know, why is this a rule? You know, and when you sit down and you think about what you're doing and why you're not supposed to doing, or you know, you think about the rule itself, you say, well, that's dumb. Why do I do that? You know, why does that hurt? You know, I don't care what you believe in. You can believe in any God you want. The thing that I'm looking at is your way of getting there. Why are you doing that? You know, who told you to do that? Who's got the authority to do that to you? Where is it written down?
Authority. That's a big one.
Well, that's it. Who took your authority away? And I tell people, you know, you've got to do that. And I've said already too, if you feel that you're really having problems, call me.
You
know, and I'll talk you through it.
Chris is great at this. Chris is great at pointing out where authority is and is not, and separating all that out for you. This is a real skill that Chris has. So, you know, in a minute when we talk about how to do that, let's talk about how to reach you. You know, Chris, you said this word authority, and it was something I wanted to get to tonight and sort of ran out of time. I'm sure we'll talk about this subject again. There is only one authority in your life, and you know how you've heard it said before. If you want to meet that authority, go get yourself a mirror, because that's the only one who's really in charge. The one difference between quitting smoking and getting rid of Dogma is your parents probably did not drive into you your whole childhood that you should smoke. And that's what makes this a little bit more complicated. That's what makes this, you know, even more of a purge to get rid of, is because the very people that you're supposed to be able to trust are the people who are more likely than not the ones who placed it upon you. So it is now about 1:45, and I feel like we're coming to an end of this discussion tonight. And does anybody have anything else they want to add before we do the round and the jump out?
Well, just to add on to what you just said about the people that have done this to you in your life, you know, people shouldn't look at it, your parents have done something bad to you, because that seems to be a big thing nowadays. It's like, oh, my parents did this, my parents did that.
I wasn't saying that. Yeah.
No, I know. I'm just going over. It's like they didn't do it because it was done to them. You know, they didn't get that way on their own. Nobody got that way on their own. Somebody programmed them to be like that. It's been like this for 2,000 years. You know, people have been programming each other for years.
Right. You might be the first one in your family. You might wind up being the first one in your family who does not live this way.
I am. I am the only. Well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the only one that refuses.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I mean, you know, whoever's listening to this, who participates at this level, might wind up being the only one in the family who doesn't live that way. So that's a very important thing to know. Morgan, do you have any closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. I'm sure people are probably aware of this on some level, but I do want to make sure I'll go ahead and say it, is that realize that when you do this, you are taking a huge step for yourself. This is the same thing, more so perhaps a few decades ago, it would have been the same thing as a gay or lesbian person coming out of the closet. And nowadays, a transgender person identifying publicly with who they are and going through the process of physically changing. It takes that amount of courage to do this. And realize there will be people who oppose you. You will meet that resistance. You will have some internal resistance, of course, because you've been taught that this is the way you're supposed to be, and that's what you're working to overcome so that you can find a new way of being. But realize there will be external opposition as well, and that's when you have to stand strong. And realize that the struggle is very much worth every bit of effort and every bit of pain that you're putting into it. Because if you don't put this pain and this effort into it, into becoming who you really are and living your life as who you really are, not who someone told you have to be, then you won't really be living your life. And whether you believe there's another life after this or not, you know you've only got this one life on this earth. At least you do if you don't believe in reincarnation. So are you going to make the most of it, and are you going to live it the way you want to? And take the courage of knowing that if you're willing to do that, it's going to be worth every bit of pain, opposition, and argument that you get from anybody who's close to you. And if they can't accept who you are and who you're becoming, then it's probably time to move away from them.
Thank you for that, Morgan. I mean, both you and Chris have said some really brilliant things tonight, and both of your closings have been extraordinary, I must say. Yeah, this is hard work. It's all hard work, and that's why we have to do it. If you feel so much like you need to move in this direction, then you do. Follow your internal mechanism on this thing, and know that there is work ahead, but also know that there are people out there who have done it and who have a compassionate response to your experience. I think tonight we have all really expressed the compassionate side of ourselves in that way and made it very clear that we are available in this sense, and that we are people who are willing to share what we've been through in these processes. I don't know that I've been through as much of it because from which I was reared was already essentially blood sport, and I say that with respect for the work of blood sorcery. So on that note, I want to mention that the website that Morgan has created, darkmattersradiocagliastro.com, is brilliant. It is really the epicenter for all that we do here. All of our contact information is on it, and it tells you enough about each one of us to be able to understand who we are and how we may serve the situation that comes across your table, and how you might find someone amongst us who is useful in this process for you. I will say, let's just quickly say how we can be reached aside from going there, because if you've missed anything about how to reach us, it's right there on this wonderful website that Morgan built, darkmattersradiocagliastro.com, and Victor's on that site too. So Morgan, you want to tell us how to reach you?
Yes, real quickly. The link to that website, by the way, for those who are listening online at Blog Talk Radio, is at the top of the page where the weekly show description is. So you can just click on that link, and our emails are also there if you go to that. So you can reach me, though, at morganstknight@hotmail.com. You can also reach me through the webpage I've written through my book, talesofmedea.com, and that is for my book, Curse of Prometheus, A Tale of Medea.
Read that book. Say that all the time. It's fantastic. Chris?
And you can reach me on helsrogue, HELS, @gmail.com, and also my Facebook page, Hell's Rogue.
I can be reached pretty much by putting my name in Google. It'll come up. There'll be tons of options. You can find my website, Cagliastro, the Iron Ring. You can find the Dark Matters radio show. You can find all kinds of comments and issues about my work. I have 14 books on Amazon, maybe 15 by the time you listen to this, because 23 Sigils is about ready to pop out. My life is in service to the disincarnate and the subjects of blood sorcery, and if you want to study with me, the way to do it is to get involved in the Wednesday night classes. Send me an email about that first. It's sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. I keep it as simple as possible. This is powerful work filled with integrity, and it's work for adults. So if you are interested and you have questions, please feel free to send an email to me at sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. I'm grateful for the listeners. I'm grateful for the honor to be part of this work. I'm grateful for the individuals who take the time to be on the air with me. Thank you. And on that note, this has been a lot to think about tonight. I am the Sorceress Cagliastro, blood sorceress and necromancer in the hands of 9. And I thank everyone for listening, and I'd like to say good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.